Was Rudy Giuliani raided to get Pelosi's laptop?
Mr. Reagan.
Okay, so before we get into this, I need to say that what I'm about to say is highly speculative. And before I made this video, as I was mulling over the idea, I shared it with a number of other people. And one person in particular, somebody I respect greatly, said, and I quote, "That's garbage, don't even go to places like that." So I was highly dissuaded not to make this video, and yet I think I should. I think it's important. So I'm rebelling a little bit, I guess. Now, I will say this. The guy who I was talking to, he hates conspiracy theories. And I mean, he really hates them passionately. But here's the thing about that. So do I. I hate conspiracy theories, and I hate disinformation, and everything that I report, I research fully to make absolutely sure that everything I'm reporting to you guys is 100% accurate. But I do think, on the other hand, speculation can be incredibly valuable so long as it's presented as speculation, and so long as it is perceived as such. I would not represent the idea that I will present in this video as fact, and it should not be taken as fact. This is merely speculation. And listen, although I respect my friend greatly, I must say that I disagree with him here. I don't think that this theory is garbage. I think it's rather plausible. And let me just say that this is not some theory that I saw on 4chan or 8chan or one of the other chans that now exist. I don't go to those sites. I don't use Reddit. I'm not plugged into these things. This theory that I'm about to present comes from my own brain. It is based simply on two things that I read about in the news recently. One thing that was widely reported and another thing that was not widely reported. The story begins on January 6th, 2021, the great protest at the Capitol, or what the Democrats would call the insurrection. We'll get into all of it in one moment, but first, of course, I have to sell you something. Now, spring is here, and what do we do in spring? Spring cleaning. The mower needs to be sorted, the garden looks a little bit wrecked, and the barbecue needs some work. You might enjoy doing these jobs, but if you don't, or you can't, you're gonna need to pay somebody else, and that takes a bit of money. And let's face it, putting money aside for comfortable retirement is the only way that you're going to get out of doing the lawn yourself, right? And if you got a little bit of money saved up in the bank, well, that way you can visit the kids, you can hike the trail, you can play golf, all the things that your friends are doing. And Noble Gold can help with this by investing in precious metals along with your other investments. A gold or silver IRA is a great way of doing this. And this month, Noble Gold is gifting a genuine rare Carson City minted Morgan silver dollar with every qualifying IRA or 401k that you invest with. And this thing is fantastic. I mean, even just the case, I love this thing. See, because I actually really love old coins and stuff like that. And it's absolutely beautiful. I looked it up, and these things are a nice little chunk of change, and it's genuinely old. I mean, apparently these things were distributed in the 70s. They were obviously minted in the 19th century. In 1964, after a century in obscurity in the vaults. So these were in like the vaults. And so in the 1960s, they were like, okay, let's go ahead and distribute these. And I think the initial offering was like 15 bucks, and all these collectors bought them up. But yeah, now that you can get one in this nifty case, I mean, this thing, it's beautiful. It really is sort of like an old-fashioned thing that you can have, and it reminds you of better days in America when everybody wasn't so woke and crazy. People say that, oh, if you're nostalgic for the old times, you're nostalgic for oppression. No, 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 no. If you're nostalgic for the old times, you're nostalgic for a time in America where people respected things like morality and ethics and not like wokeness and horrible things like that. But when people they actually had a sense of integrity. And I think people long for those days. All right, so if you want one of these Carson City coins and you want to invest in an IRA or a 401k, get in touch with the experts at noblegoldinvestments.com or call 877-646-5347 and talk to the experts now. That's 877-646-5347, or you can go to the website noblegoldinvestments.com or click the link in the description below. Okay, so the story begins on January 6th during the protest at the Capitol. One protester who was perusing the halls of Congress found Nancy Pelosi's office, walked in, and stole her laptop. Now, most of you have probably heard about that already. This is not exactly breaking news. However, what is breaking news, and what you may not have heard, is that the FBI still hasn't gotten the laptop back. And this is strange because they released the name of one suspect already, a woman by the name of Riley June Williams, who was reported to the FBI by her ex-boyfriend and her own mother, which is pretty intense.
New details and new video of the Capitol rioter accused of stealing Nancy Pelosi's laptop.
This is 22-year-old Riley Williams from Pennsylvania in the Capitol on January 6th, according to the FBI. Upstairs is Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office. Inside, a female voice the FBI believes to be Williams seems excited.
I'm in Nancy.
Where are you? On the desk is Pelosi's HP laptop. The same voice tells others to treat it carefully.
Dude, put on gloves!
According to the FBI, a witness claims Williams stole the laptop and intended to send the computer device to a friend in Russia to be passed to Russian intelligence. Williams turned herself in to authorities shortly after the Capitol assault.
So there was never really any update on this story as far as I ever saw, not at least in the national news, but I did look into it and it turns out Riley June Williams didn't steal the laptop, or at least the FBI couldn't find it after investigating her. The report about Riley June Williams was uniquely bizarre. This woman was allegedly going to sell Nancy Pelosi's laptop to the Russians, which that didn't make any sense at all. Let's say you, a conservative patriot, found in your possession evidence that would implicate Nancy Pelosi in criminal activity, evidence that would destroy Pelosi's career, maybe even land her in prison. What would you do with this evidence? Now, many of you have some idea just in your heads right now as I say it. Some plan has just popped into your mind. What I doubt any of you thought just now was, I'd sell it to the Russians. That's just not something conservative patriots would ever think to do. If this woman, Riley June Williams, really was a Trump supporter and really did steal Pelosi's precious laptop, she certainly would not have sold it to the Russians. You know, a lot of the news stories that Democrats put out somehow involve Russia. It's like this weird thing with them, I guess. I don't know. There seem to be only three possibilities here. Either Riley June Williams did steal the laptop and intended to steal it to the Russians, but you know, she wasn't actually a Trump supporter or a patriot or any of those things. She was more likely an anarchist, something like that. You know, maybe Antifa or BLM, one of those. Another possibility is she stole the laptop, is a patriot, and never intended to sell it to the Russians. Or the third possibility, she didn't steal it at all, and somebody else in the Capitol stole it that day. So what did happen to Nancy Pelosi's laptop? Well, let's get back to that in a moment. For now, let's continue on with our story. So the laptop is stolen. The FBI released the name of the suspect and indicates that they know what happened to the laptop. The suspect then turns herself into the FBI. The FBI then puts out this absurd theory that the suspect is going to sell the laptop to the Russians. It's crazy, but whatever. They have their suspect in custody. They can now go find the laptop. Everything's good, right? Wrong. So another weird thing about this, which I mentioned before, is that we never heard about this again. The only update that I could find was from a local news station in Washington, D.C. When I heard about Riley June Williams turning herself in, I just assumed that the FBI would find the laptop in short order and everything would be good, and I stopped paying attention to the story after that. But it turns out that the FBI are utterly incompetent. It turns out that they have no idea what happened to Pelosi's laptop. In fact, I have a very close friend who was reporting on the event of January 6th, and he too was approached by the FBI, and I suspect it was about the laptop. He didn't say that to me, but that's what I think. And listen, my friend did not take that laptop. So if they suspect that my friend, who certainly didn't take the laptop, if they suspect that maybe he stole it, which is preposterous, well, then they really have no idea what happened to it. After January 6th, the FBI went on a tear, arresting everybody that they could identify in the Capitol. Not only have these people been arrested, but many of them are still in prison without bail, and they're being held in solitary confinement. Until last week, when I found out that Pelosi's laptop was still in the wind, I couldn't figure out why exactly these protesters were being treated like Guantanamo detainees. But this might be the reason. This might be why these protesters are being treated worse than murderers and rapists after committing the vicious crime of casually walking through the Capitol building. Now, we all presumed, all of us conservatives out here in conservative media land, we all presumed that the reason that they were being treated this harshly was to send a message to the political enemies of Democrats. If you're a Trump supporter, we don't like you. You will be hunted down, and you will be prosecuted for any reason. We have all the power, and you are merely subjects of our authority. Kneel, obey, submit. We assume that the persecution of January 6th protesters was merely an intimidation tactic. But maybe it isn't. Maybe they're just still looking for the dang laptop. And how do I know for sure that they're still looking for this laptop? How do we know that it's not all just some kind of a ruse so that they can target and persecute political enemies? Well, a couple of days ago, there was a story in the news that almost no one covered. A place called the Homer Inn and Spa in Alaska was raided by the FBI in a botched attempt to recover Nancy Pelosi's laptop. Now, this is the home of Paul and Marilyn Huper, and it was raided last Wednesday, that's April 28th, at 9 a.m. Alaska time. And when I say raided, I mean they legit broke down the door and pointed guns at everyone, and they handcuffed everybody in the place.
You were raided, a kick in the door type of raid by the FBI yesterday. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. 9 o'clock in the morning.
9 o'clock in the morning. It must be extremely frightening to see something like that.
Well, yes and no. It was a little alarming when I came around the corner and heard FBI, get your hands up in the air, and I turned around the corner into our dining room. There's 6 or 7 guns pointed right at my head, and not knowing what's going on or what is happening. So it's a little disorienting. I just have to say up front, my conscience was clear. I had no fear of, okay, what have I done? Did they find a stash of something illegal? Was I involved in any illegal activity? So inside, I'm going, okay, well, this is obviously not what it seems to be.
Okay, so this was a serious deal. They genuinely thought that this lady was the laptop thief, and they were employing the full force of the FBI to come in and tear these people's home up, disrupt their lives, and get that laptop back. Of course, it turned out that they had the wrong people. These folks were in D.C. on January 6th, and they did attempt the Trump rally, and they did walk to the Capitol later that day, but they never went inside. And they certainly never stole the laptop. The FBI eventually figured this out, but only after harassing these people and confiscating a bunch of their stuff. The really interesting thing about all this is that the Pelosi camp has actually dismissed the importance of this laptop. They said, oh, that's just something from the conference room. We use that for slides. There's nothing important on that. No big deal. Okay, that's great. But then why is the FBI still trying to find it? If it's as useless as a paperweight, well then, they could just let it go. It seems like maybe there's more to it than just it's a laptop used for slides. I'm sure some of the protesters stole like staplers from the Capitol, but I don't hear about the FBI breaking down doors to try to get the staplers back. Why? Because you can't do anything significant with a stapler. Staplers don't compromise national security. Staplers don't have information on them that could compromise the Speaker of the House. But laptops can have those qualities. And so I think the laptop is a little bit more important than, or maybe a lot more important, than the Pelosi camp is letting on. So what does this have to do with Rudy Giuliani? Well, do you remember when I asked you, what would you do if you had compromising information on Nancy Pelosi? Well, I asked myself this very question when I first heard about the laptop being stolen. And the first thing I thought was, get it to Giuliani. Now, a couple other thoughts crossed my mind. Maybe make some copies, send the information to various media outlets, get it to as many people as possible. But the first thought was, get it to Giuliani. He's the kind of guy that'll get this kind of information out there. He'll deal with it using the proper legal channels. I mean, look at what he did with the Hunter laptop information. He got it to the FBI. He got it to the Delaware police. He did his duty. And he also got it disseminated by various media sources. To me, getting the laptop to Giuliani makes sense. And it probably made sense to the FBI, too. If the FBI are still looking for that laptop, it makes perfect sense that they try to find it with Giuliani. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the FBI raid on Giuliani's apartment last week.
About 6 o'clock in the morning, there was a big bang, bang, bang on the door. And outside were seven FBI agents with a warrant for electronics. And I looked at the warrant and I said, this is extraordinary because I've offered to give these to the government and talk it over with the government for 2 years. I don't know why they have to do this. The agents seemed somewhat apologetic, I might say. They were very, very professional and very gentlemanly. The only time they got perturbed is at the end of the search when they had taken about, I'd say, 7 or 8 electronic items of mine, which is what they took. and 2 of someone else's, they weren't taking the 3 hard drives, which of course are electronic devices. They just mimic the computer. I said, well, don't you want these? And they said, what are they? I said, those are Hunter Biden's hard drives. And they said, no. I said, are you sure you don't want them? I mean, the warrant required them to take it. And they said, no. And one last time I said, don't you think you should take it and they said no. Now, Hunter Biden's hard drives fall within the scope of the subpoena. The subpoena required them to take all electronics, but they decided to leave that behind. And they also were completely content to rely on my word that these were Hunter Biden's hard drives. I mean, they could have been Donald Trump's. They could have been Vladimir Putin's. They could have been anybody's.
They also raided Victoria Tunzing's home. Now, it's been reported that the FBI were issued the warrant in order to investigate Giuliani for a possible FARA violation. But that makes zero sense for several reasons. FARA is the Foreign Agents Registration Act from 1938, and basically it just says that if you're going to lobby the federal government on behalf of a foreign government, then you have to register as an agent of that foreign government. That's it. That's all it means.
So from what we have read in the press, the Department of Justice wants to know whether you violated FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, in representing foreign nationals, Ukrainians, for pay. You didn't register. They're saying that may have been a crime. We know for a fact that Hunter Biden did that. He didn't register under FARA. He represented Ukrainians. He probably made a lot more than you did. He also represented Chinese nationals, lobbying his dad. And he has not been charged with a FARA violation. Am I missing something here?
I can tell you, I never, ever represented a foreign national. In fact, I have in my contracts a refusal to do it because from the time I got out of being mayor, I didn't want to lobby. Never did it to Bush, never did it to Obama, never did it with Trump. And I can prove it. And the reality is that that warrant is completely illegal. The only way you can get a search warrant is if you can show that there's some evidence that the person is going to destroy the evidence or is going to run away with the evidence. Well, I've had it for 2 years and I haven't destroyed it. And they also got it from the iCloud. So there was no justification for that warrant. It is an illegal, unconstitutional warrant.
Now, let's pretend for one moment that this is, in fact, why they're investigating Giuliani. We know it isn't, but let's say that it is. FARA violations are fairly common, and they're almost never prosecuted. In fact, the government is routinely accused of using FARA as a tool of persecution, targeted prosecution of those the government doesn't like for some reason or another. So even if the FBI actually is going after Giuliani for FARA, which they obviously aren't, but even if they were, they have to know that this will be seen as political persecution. So it's strange that this appears to be the official story. But if they're not actually going after him for FARA, and this is just an excuse, then that means that the FBI is using a cover which they know will make them look partisan and corrupt. So what they're actually going after Giuliani for, well, then that must be something that they really don't want the public to know about. So what is the truth? Well, my well-respected friend that tried to dissuade me from doing this video, he believes that this is just intimidation. Giuliani went hard after Joe Biden, he went hard after Hunter Biden, and the FBI are now working with the Biden administration. So if the Biden administration is truly corrupt, well, they will be perfectly willing to use the FBI to go in and intimidate their political enemies. Obama did this several times. The Associated Press was targeted by Obama's FBI. The Obama FBI also targeted a journalist by the name of James Rosen. The Obama IRS targeted Tea Party groups and effectively destroyed them. And the Obama Justice Department famously persecuted Dinesh D'Souza for a campaign finance violation. So to suspect that Biden's FBI would also be willing to engage in this kind of politically targeted harassment needs no stretch of the imagination. However, it all seems a little arbitrary. Subjecting January 6th protesters to indefinite detention, putting them in solitary confinement, treating them like Guantanamo detainees, like terrorists, well, this doesn't send a clear message, and it isn't clearly directed at any particular group. Conservatives don't, by and large, see this as a clear message to them to submit to Biden's authority or else. The same goes for Giuliani. If the FBI is just trying to intimidate Rudy Giuliani, Joe diGenova, Victoria Tunzing, and John Solomon, they've done a terrible job. John Solomon and Rudy Giuliani both went to the press immediately after Giuliani's home was raided. And I'm sure all of them will instantly be encouraged to investigate this, not discouraged out of fear of the FBI. And I think the FBI knows this. I think the FBI knows that persecuting January 6th protesters will only piss off Trump supporters. We would never submit because of something like this. This just makes us want to fight back more. And they know that persecuting Giuliani and diGenova and Tunzing and Solomon, well, that will only embolden them. Conservatives are not lilting flowers. We don't scare easily. So I don't think the intimidation explanation makes sense. Now that said, not everything the FBI does makes sense. And certainly the Democrats do a lot of things that don't make any sense at all. And so it's still possible that this is the reality, that the FBI really are just trying to intimidate people. But I'm not convinced. What makes more sense to me is that the FBI are not going after a FARA violation, and they're not trying merely to intimidate, but rather that they're still trying to find Nancy Pelosi's laptop. As I said, it just makes sense that anyone who might have stolen the laptop would have wanted to get it to Giuliani. If there was data on that laptop to incriminate Nancy Pelosi in any way, Giuliani would need to be the person to get it to. And diGenova, Tunzing, and Solomon are all known associates of Giuliani, and folks that Giuliani would likely have shared this data with, or at least discussed his possession of such data with. And so it makes sense that his communications with these people would have been combed through by the FBI. And it also makes sense that they didn't want the Hunter Biden hard drives that Giuliani offered them. Now, Giuliani couldn't understand why the FBI would have refused the Hunter Biden hard drives. Well, I found this particularly confusing because my initial thought was that this was an operation to try to cover for Joe and Hunter by destroying all the copies of the Hunter Biden laptop, and yet it wasn't. It couldn't have been, because Giuliani offered them the hard drives and they didn't take them. And I didn't get that. I was baffled. But once I heard about the raid on the couple in Alaska, it all made sense. The FBI still hasn't found Nancy Pelosi's laptop. Of course, that's what they're looking for. And maybe that's wrong, but the puzzle pieces all make sense. It should also be noted that the raid on Giuliani's apartment was also last Wednesday, April 28th, the exact same day, just 1 hour after the raid in Alaska. Whatever the case, I imagine that eventually we'll know the truth. I hope so, at least. But until then, I do think it's healthy to speculate. Now let me know what you guys think in the comments. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant, it's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening.